So thank you, President Williams, for being with us for our inaugural Grounded in Justice, Rooted in Wellness, North Carolina Black Alliance Environmental Justice and Healthcare Summit. That's a full word, full mouthful. I'm trying to get it out.
I'm glad you had to say it and not me. You are most welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you so much. And so for folks who are tuning in, my name is Lamisha Whittington, or as LA, as many folks know me, and I serve as the Deputy Director of Programs with the North Carolina Black Alliance, to serve with an incredible team of folks who have made today possible. So thank you all for tuning in and listening. And definitely, with Q&A, if you have any questions that we don't cover in this conversation, please feel free to drop them in the chat or email them us directly, and we'll make sure to get them to President Shauna Williams. So back to our conversation, Q&A. And so President Williams serves as the president of the board for the Warren County Community Center here in the historic Warren County. And so as you heard, hopefully in President Williams' opening remarks, was just the many prolific elements of her journey and just the expertise, the history, the rich power and the narrative that she has shaped around this community and many other communities around the nation. And so again, President Williams, thank you for, the honor of, on the 40th anniversary, we'll talk about that in a little bit, the 40th anniversary of the environmental justice movement housing us in our conversation here for today. So speaking of the 40th, if we can give recognition to the history, tell us a little bit more about the room that we're actually having our conversation in today.
When the people got together and decided that they needed to have a community center, they decided to build a building. And it's evident to us from reading the history, and we've got documented history that has been written down, that education was very important. School teachers were involved. In fact, the first countywide PTA grew out of organizing the Warren County Community Center. And so this is our library. It's been pared down because we had a lot of duplicate and triplicate books. But we still have like an old card catalog. We still have an old manual typewriter. We have a film player. So there's all kinds of wonderful artifacts in here, as well as these are first edition books.
Wow.
And many of them written by Black people, which is really fun too. So this room is full of all kinds of history. We have books that have been handwritten. Who gave what in terms of the books that are in here? Who gave what in terms of money? $1 here, $2 there. And then we've got financial records. I mean, it's wonderful. We did have a flood many, many, many years ago, but so we've lost a lot, but we've retained a lot as well. So the library is a very, very important part and has been from the very beginning. And one of the recent things we learned is that the late actor Earl Hyman was a child coming back. He was born here in Warren County, but his family moved to New York. So he came back from Brooklyn one summer and wanted to read a book. His folks brought him to the library. He comes in here and it says to the librarian, "I want the biggest book you have," because he thought the bigger the book, the more knowledge he could gain. So she says, "Well, I believe that would be a book about William Shakespeare." And he says, "Well, okay, I'd like to have that book." He says it was the biggest book he'd ever seen, but he took it home. When his parents would tell him, like, time out, go upstairs and be quiet, he would pull out this book and he said, "I've got Shakespeare." And then the rest of the story is the man goes on, this influenced his decision to become an actor. He said, "Because I knew Shakespeare was written to be acted." And so he becomes an actor. He, I believe, had acted in something like 9 Shakespearean plays. I mean, just incredible. Started right here in this room. Oh, and the other thing that we had, so at first we built the library, and I understand there was a place in the back, people would come and donate books. Well, the other thing, after a number of years of having the physical space, we got a bookmobile. So they would take books into the community, and just like a library, you could borrow them for 2 weeks, and then they would come back 2 weeks later, pick them up, you could borrow another one. And so the folks, they had a librarian, they had a bookmobile driver. These folks had it going on.
Right.
And so education wouldn't suffer. And then I've also learned that people like Langston Hughes, Arnabon Tom, at the invitation of one of the school people, Black, of course, school people, they came and spoke here in the Warren County Community Center. So we've had very famous people in this building, and here we are.
Well, I am honored that we get to interview another famous person. So thank you. And so just what really resonates with me is just the power of community. When you're saying to me there's first edition books here and written by Black authors, and the fact that we're not hearing that in national media landscape, just the value and honor of the richness that's held within a rural community in North Carolina. Not just any rural community. Again, we'll get to the history of Warren County as we've heard in your speech, the importance of the environmental justice movement, but to think about additional rich history that has added to many other movements, right? It's all intersectional. When you hear authors, when you hear what you're saying, acting and actually being able to study the arts, just the immersion of Black excellence is what I've sensed, but also hear from your comments. And so just thinking about Black excellence, as president of the board, tell us a little bit more about your responsibilities and what's going on with the Warren County Community Center.
Well, Warren County Community Center, as you know, has been in existence for 80-some years. It sounds like there was a little bit of a lull, probably maybe the 60s after the flood. And just, people die, they get sick, they move on. So in 2008, my husband and I were asked to join the board because they had lost a number of members. It's supposed to be a 15-person board. And we were delighted to be able to join the board. We feel like we are the keepers of this little jewel. And I tell people all the time, back when this building was created, and I believe for many, many years, this was a secret. They didn't brag about what they did. They didn't brag about having this building. This was the only place for Black people to go. If you had any kind of function, party, wedding, whatever, they came to the community center. If you had to go to the bathroom, you came to the community center. If a farmer wanted to go downtown to do business and he'd been out in the fields farming, he would come here downstairs and take a shower and put on another set of clothes and go into town to look presentable.
Wow.
So, you talk about, it's so many people who were involved in education, like Gillis Cheek, who was the first board president. He was a principal of schools here. So education was always very important, and I think they inspired us to do better. So we try to get the word about the Warren County Community Center out there. We're trying to get on the National Register of Historic Places. We have a program called Race to the Top A's Fund, inspired by my husband, who was a school teacher for 33 years. We enroll 15 children per high school. We have 3 high schools in Warren County. They have to apply for the program. If they get no grade below a C, if they have good behavior and good attendance, no suspensions, we will give them $5 for each A they make on their report card. And if they need tutoring, one of the things I'm really proud of, again, my husband's suggestion, because if a child helps tutor another one, they usually get better results than adults do. And so we've managed to do a tutoring program using the A students in the program with the D students in the program to help them. And so that's been very rewarding. We have 2 fundraisers a year. One of them is a Black History program where I feel like if you're going to give us some money, we're going to give you some information. And of course it ends up that we give them some of the history, we have music, we have spoken word, and we try to involve children from the A's Fund program. Also part of the A's Fund, like you'll see pictures up there, we took them to a trip to DC to the Black History Museum there. We took them to a baseball game one year, not far from here. First time most of them had gone. We've been invited to the North Carolina Museum of History, so that'll be another trip down the road for us to take. But we want the young people to get involved and see the community center, and you'd be surprised how many of their parents come in here and say, I've never been inside.
Wow.
And so, long term, we're looking to make a museum. We're looking to hire staff so that we're looking for grant money, but hire staff so that we can have the building open and let people come in and see it. We started having open houses a number of years ago so that we could be open a few times a year. And those have been very successful. But now that we're in the middle of this major rehabilitation of the building, we're going to have a grand reopening and let people come in to see what we've done. So we're just starting it, but I'm excited that it's happening because it's been a long time coming. Because if you look like us in this town, while there are people who will get grant money for people who don't look like us, they never seem to be able to get us the grant money. But thank God I have finally made the right connections with people. So we got the first grant from this big grant. I mean, we've gotten other grants from the county, like our bathroom out there has been renovated with money from our own local county. But this is we needed a big grant to try to do as much as possible. And so we're going to keep looking for more money. We're going to keep working with the new people that we've met who've been advising us and telling us, they're like, well, you need to hire staff because now nonprofits shouldn't just be volunteer boards.
That's right.
And they're right. And there's only one of me.
Right.
And so, we can hire an executive director, a library curator, so people can come in and see what we've got, or a museum curator, not a librarian, but
right.
Come see this rich history, because there is so much of it that you can't even see just walking around it.
Right.
We got rooms downstairs, we've got meeting rooms, so we still have a lot of work to do, but it's exciting because I feel like finally, since 2008, I mean, that's a long time,
right?
But we're getting there.
And you're a legacy keeper. I heard you use the word keeper, right? And that's a word that really resonates with me, because I feel oftentimes in our communities we have keepers, and they're not always seen, and sometimes they're behind the scenes, but they hold everything together and they continue the legacy of what has been started. And it's just, to me, just hearing your speech and hearing in this moment how you're explaining all the roles that you hold in community, right? Alongside your husband, alongside the leaders, former board, what's powerful to me is you coming here to report what happened and to elevate the narrative in the media, what was dumped in this community, a chemical contaminant. You are in this iteration, 40 years later, still now elevating the narrative of the power that has always been here, not just the dumping. That's not the legacy. The legacy is what you've named in here. The legacy is the youth that you're investing in as president of the board. That's that's additional labor, right? Oftentimes we hear president of the board means like it's a little volunteer board, a little treasury here and there. But that call, and just to see that circle and that calling, you said in your speech, divine. Right, that divine.
That's the only way you can explain it. How a kid from New York City ends up in Warren County, married to a man whose child was participating in the marches.
Right.
Of course, she did have permission, for those who are asking the question. Did he know she was going? Yes, he gave her permission. He did not march because he was a school teacher and he had to feed those 3 hungry mouths. But people laugh at me because technically I supposedly had retired years ago, but the community, I'm passionate about the community center. This is just, the history is incredible. And in fact, when we got the money, the grant money, I said, we can now fix this building up and make it look like our ancestors would be proud of it, because it's a wonderful space.
Right.
It's a wonderful reason they created it. Well, it's a bad reason because white people wouldn't let them use bathrooms, but you know what I mean. They did something really good in creating this, and it's on us now to keep it going. I guess that's why I got placed here, is to get the word out about this place, because it's shocking to me. I'm trying to find books written about it. Nobody's written a book, so that's another one on my to-do list. I'm gonna have to write a book about the community
and that
center.
purpose, that design.
And I'm thinking, well, who better to do it? You like to write, you know the history, you've been involved, you might as well. So
that's right.
We have two board members, both a little bit older than me, but they oh my gosh, they are full of the history. One of them, her mom used to work for the extension service in the building right next door.
Oh my goodness.
And the dad she said the dad used to go to the building over there to that office all the time. They couldn't figure out what it was, and they realized he was trying to court her.
That's funny.
And then my vice president, Felton Davis, he's in his 80s. The man's had cancer, strokes, lost a child, lost a wife. He's one of our biggest volunteers.
Wow. You
call Felton, he is here. He is Johnny on the spot. He is right there. I mean, and he almost single-handedly, he's been on the board over 50 years. That man almost single-handedly kept this organization alive. He was a school teacher. So, he saw the importance of this place. He saw the need to keep it going. And, when there was nobody else around, he's like, well, I guess I better do it.
Right. And when you mention like honoring the ancestors, and I think around group economics and what you were saying years ago of having to keep this place private, and the other elevations you made of the segregation and not being allowed to use bathrooms and the hospitals or washrooms, and I think about the group economics of historically, ancestrally, we have always kept us safe. And even when we came out of emancipation, we designed Black-only towns in over 24 states. North Carolina isn't exempt from that Black excellence, that legacy. And I noticed when I walked in here, there's a picture in that frame of the original Black elected officials that were elected right post-emancipation. And within 25 years, I believe it was, we had 187 Black elected officials in North Carolina. And so I think about that continuation of that legacy, even as we're talking about the bedrock in this community, is keeping us safe. And you elevating now what we had to create as privacy. We had to stay hidden to stay alive. But we now have to unearth what is buried to let folks know that the beacon of how we are resilient, how we do group economics, how we survive being dumped on has always been the hidden diamond in the rough, but we've always been diamonds. And I always say they try to bury us, they just didn't know we were seeds. And so speaking of that keeping us safe, tell us a little bit more if you'll elaborate. You said this in your speech, right? The Warren County, I want in our Q&A as folks are saying, okay, PCB, we're hearing about the dumping. What has been some of the impact of first that PCB coming, because I heard you connected to New York, and this national kind of occurrence of Black communities being dumped upon over and over again. And we know that's what environmental justice really means. Environmental justice doesn't mean recycling. Doesn't mean individual habits. And I hear a lot of folks trying to conflate the many different threads, and that's not what it is. It's not a institutionalized academic field of study. It is quite literally a movement that was birthed here that protested against a Black community, and Black communities nationwide then were able to take the term environmental justice and say, wait a minute, we've also been dumped upon. And that's the actual definition of environmental justice. But not to get too deep in those weeds, tell us a little bit more that when you were reporting and in your speech, the PCB, what have you seen as an impact over the years?
Honestly, I don't know that we've seen the impact. And I say that simply because we really don't know the number of people who died, the number of people got sick, because they just never studied it. Nobody ever looked at it. And it's interesting talking about the African American community, because in those 4 years of trying to figure out, of trying to stop the dump from coming, we learned that they picked another southern town, minority Black, as an alternative to Warren County.
Wow.
So why does this stuff always have to go into a Black majority community?
Correct. Come on.
That's a problem.
Come on.
That's a problem.
That's a problem.
We need to speak up and make sure this stops happening.
That's right.
It's just unconscionable that, it's going to cost too much. Let's start out with the Ward Transformer Company. They knew doggone well that what they decided to do was illegal, but they didn't care because they were trying to line their pockets with more money. It would have cost them more to use the EPA, follow the EPA regulation. But no, let's just open up the tanks and spray this stuff on all these roadways. That's the fast, easy way to get rid of it, rather than drive. I think they were supposed to drive it to Pennsylvania or something. They didn't take that option. They took the and of course they were strategic about which counties they chose to dump it in.
That's right.
And then out of 14 counties, you choose Warren, the governor of North Carolina, Jim Hunt, you choose Warren County, probably one of the smallest, definitely the most Black, definitely one of the poorest. Right. And they thought politically impotent. Well, they got a surprise. And the surprise for all of us was not only were Black people upset, white people were upset too. And when I talk to people who were there, who were protesting, they marvel that this was one of the few times, if ever, Black and white came together in this community. They walked side by side, they cried side by side, they were hand in hand, and they got it done. They kept protesting, their voices got heard. Ken Ferruccio was one of the people who, he did the scientific search to find out how bad this stuff was. And then, of course, they got even madder when they discovered how nasty this stuff was. So I don't know that we'll ever know the ill effects from this stuff. We know the positive side, which was they tried to harm us, but we're rising above.
That's right.
We're going forward.
That's right.
We're going to let other people know what happened to us so it doesn't happen to you. and it doesn't need to happen to anybody else. And if we don't stand up for ourselves, and if we don't tell our own story, we're going to keep getting dumped on.
That's right.
So we hope to be a lesson for other people. You got to stand up and let your voice be heard and go forward and be positive. And that's what we're hoping to do.
We protect us. And just, I appreciate just, I see, because bubbling to the surface to me is, if coming from a deep, background, and we'll get to that in a minute, where our family connection, because this process has, and I think that's the other beautiful part that we'll get to for listeners, because I really kind of want to end with, what is the Warren County Community Center doing next, but I also want to end with like how we're all interconnected. But before we get there, so last year, the North Carolina Black Alliance, we host our first NC State Unfair, and we did it during the fair time, and so we called it NC State Unfair. And it was our first Environmental Justice Day Summit, and it was in the evening though, and so we actually had Dr. Ben Chavis, and we had Senator Floyd McKissick, and Latanya Andrews Hunter, and they joined us in a conversation. We had other great folks like Valerie Jordan. It was a power week, and we had Superintendent of Warren County Schools now, Keith Sutton was on one of our panels, but we had all these great conversations. And
Can I just interrupt you really
fast?
Oh,
no, please.
So, of course, Floyd McKissick Jr. is a friend of mine, but our fathers were friends, both born in North Carolina, meet each other in New York, both at some point were Black Republicans and worked together politically. So then the daughter, Charmaine, ends up moving back to Warren County. Here I come moving to Warren County for the first time. And what I didn't tell you in my speech was, when I was a reporter at WTVD, I met Ben Chavis at the Duke Chapel, covered a speech he was giving one night, ended up covering his story, because he was part of the Wilmington 10 and he was in prison. And so he used to be able to get let out. He was in jail in prison in Hillsborough, North Carolina, and he was working with a local church in Durham. And so we would go pick him up, take him out, and he would go to different churches so he could speak. I did a number of stories about the unfairness of his incarceration, which led a governor to then give him a pardon, which is how he got out of prison.
Oh my, thank you for interrupting me so we could get that history. Because, please.
So being in the right place at the right time, that's all God. It's
that's
not
all.
me, it's God.
And I continue that thread because oh my goodness, I'm blown away. I'm sitting here like when we talk about the intersection, I understand we're talking about environmental justice and healthcare, but if we're not also talking about, as you said, human rights, civil rights, economics, housing, how to keep us safe, workers' rights, we're actually missing again the many folks in our community. Black people, we're not a monolith, and neither is our economic liberation. We all don't work the same jobs. And so I think about even how the intersection of you supporting Dr. Chavis in a moment of fighting for civil and human rights, and then here's a moment again, and I honor, Ms. Dolly Burwell and the other leaders who came in, and Attorney Fauntleroy and other folks who are in this movement, by which then you birthed the environmental justice movement. So yeah, civil and human rights with Dr. King and Dr. Chavis, and then you come here and you're like, we're going to birth the environmental justice movement because we're going to speak up. And it comes to this point where it's as if folks, and we look at the government, targets, as you said, communities that they think won't speak up because either economic depravity or conditions they think, well, they'll just deal with it. And the power of us is, no, we don't have to take what you dump on us. We were not created to be your footstool. We were not. And I think about you and I connecting, and we only met through this process, right? And so just being, big, I was already fangirling, as I call it, when I got on the call, because I'm like, oh my goodness, like, the expert broadcasting and journalism and in the background, but also just what you're doing here. But then to find out that your family is from the exact same area, town, community, let's say community, in Western North Carolina as mine. And to even know that, even as you were talking, I was saying, I visited my elders a couple of years ago, and you said, did you know there's a connection between the McKissicks and this family? And the dots to see the West is connected to the East. Yep. That we are all interconnected.
Absolutely.
And
it's mind-boggling that your uncle and my father are friends.
That's right.
Just, how does this happen?
And
How did we?
And I looked in this room and I saw the Rosenwald schools. And to know that that's the same Booker T and the same establishment that was in the mountains across North Carolina. Right. But you see this connectivity of education. what you kept saying resonates with me over what the importance of, where you were saying your husband is a school teacher and feeding 300 kids, right? Keeping 300 mouths fed. What you all are doing, invest in education. We continue to educate and incubate excellence and survival.
But we have to. This is what was drilled into me when I was a child, that you've got to get an education, because they can do a whole lot to your body or to you physically. Right. They cannot take what you put into your mind.
That's right.
And I think a lot of people, and also my mom's side of the family was from Barbados, and I know, parents who immigrated from, or relatives who immigrated from the islands, they had that same mindset. Right. My grandmother, who lived in the mountains, was a Republican because she didn't want to take a government handout. My grandfather, for whatever reason, left my dad and her in North Carolina mountains, went to Connecticut to pursue a career, I think, as a musician, which I don't think worked, but she said, I'd rather scrub white people's floors and earn a decent living to take care of my family than to take a government handout. My mom's parents, who came here as infants from Barbados, their parents had the exact same view. I want to earn my keep.
Right.
And all along, stressing the importance of education. And so that's why you have people who are able to rise up and do what needs to be done when these challenges come. I mean, I think it was brilliant that they reached out to civil rights leaders 40 years ago to say, hey, we need help. We have a problem. We need you to come help us. And so they came and they got ideas, and the laying out across the road, Dolly said that was like a last minute. She said, and I forget which leader had told her, but some leader told her, if it comes down to it, just get on the ground. Just lay down on the ground. Don't let those trucks. They won't run over you, but stop their progress. And they did. It took them much longer. I think it was something like 10,000 loads that had some 10,000 trucks coming. And the other thing that I don't say in my speech is the government, the state, locals, they were prepared that first day in mid-September of 1982. The police looked like they were outfitted for war with their helmets and their batons and their firearms. I mean, we were unarmed, just out there trying to save our air and water and what we breathe and what goes into our mouths, and they came at us with full force. Arresting children? What does it do to... What have you accomplished arresting a 4-year-old? Excuse me? I have a problem with that.
That's right.
And that's kind of that we're in charge mindset, so we can do whatever we want to do, whether it's right or wrong.
Right. And we're seeing some of these commonalities today.
And we're still seeing it today.
But we're also seeing our protest.
Yes. Yes. We're finally... Now, if we could just move to the ballot box.
That's right.
To make change.
That's right.
We see the Roe v. Wade. We see all the racial... Change starts with an election, people. We gotta go vote. I don't care that it's a midterm. I don't care there's not a president on the ballot. What we do between presidential races is almost more important than picking the president.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Because if that president doesn't have a Congress and a Senate to work with to get the stuff passed through, it's gonna languish.
That's
and how many years has stuff been languishing in this country because we can't seem to get it right. We can't seem to get... Oh, I don't want to vote. I'm not going to vote. What do you mean you're not going to vote? People fought, bled, and died for you as an African American to have the right to vote, and you're not going to exercise that right?
Exactly.
How dare you?
Exactly.
How dare you? Don't even talk to me.
Right. And I even think about what you said, local and state officials is what gave the permission for like PCB to be dumped here. So if you were not getting out and voting for or against hiring or firing, because we're the voters, which means we're the employers. And to your point, if we're not getting out and hiring and firing, we're giving consent to them to determine however they see fit our lives, our day-to-day lives, our health, whether they study the health effects data, actually study the impact of what they dumped, even though we know the impact. We see our people sick and dying, but because it's not studied, because there's no budget given, there was no money given, or there was no policy that was moved that makes the corporation study their impact or even clean it up. You're right.
The other thing, too, with the people who were in charge, who made the decision to put the dump site here, is that they lied to us. They lied about the science of it. They lied about whether or not that dump site would hold that stuff. And it didn't. It failed miserably.
Right.
Scientists warned them it would. And they would come out to public hearings and lie to the public and tell them, oh, this. And then we would find out later, oh no, that was a lie.
Right.
And so they kept trying to twist it and turn it, but it was all to their benefit, so to save a little bit of money. Well, why can't we put it in another place? No,
right.
We want to save more money. It's too much money to take it to the EPA approved site. Right. How much money is it to lose however many black lives we've lost because you put that stuff in the community? And again, it goes back to, we were politically impotent. People just did not care about voting. They weren't registered to vote.
Right.
I understand from Eva Clayton, when she moved here in the 60s, there was a project it was the Quakers came, American Field Service Committee came to town with 14 youth one summer and tried to give people education, voter registration information, to try to get people motivated to vote. And we're still doing that to this day.
Right.
My husband and I go knocking on doors, door to door, to get people, are you registered to vote? Will you please register to vote?
That's right.
And I'm still dumbfounded by the number of people who will not register.
And I hope as folks are listening into this conversation that you're also going to share this conversation with others that aren't tuning in, right? That are emerging into civic engagement, whether it's youth voters or whether it's, elders who are just now being oriented in the space of their own political power after being oppressed for so many years. And as you mentioned, Congresswoman Eva Clayton, and we talk about the history of the political power within, again, the black individuals that have come from this area that still call this area home, where, like you said, Congresswoman Clayton, when we look at Congressman Butterfield and the work that even Miss Dolly Burwell did with his office, we're talking about the political power. Valerie Jordan, the first African-American woman to be appointed as chair of the State Commission for DOT, the Department of Transportation, when she was a child who laid in front of the same DOT trucks that attempted to run her over. She's now the chair of that DOT transportation.
Don't forget Floyd McKissick, who tried to start Soul City, but politically got shot down by, who was our senator then? Jesse Helms. Got the money.
And got
the money to be taken away.
And do we think that's coincidence? Absolutely not. So tell us a little bit more about Soul City.
Well, Floyd McKissick had this vision for a black city, a black owned and built city, and so he came here. He did have Republican friends in Washington at the time, and so he got money, I believe it was out of Nixon, to build Soul City, which was supposed to be a self-contained black community. I forget the number. Some houses were built, a healthcare center was built, and then, as I said, when Jesse Helms had the opportunity, he was able to yank the money away, and basically the whole project failed.
Think about that. And so the interconnectivity of, again, your votes, politicians who remove the funding, and then here comes trucks with a chemical contaminant to not only dump on the community, but the power that was being built in this community to create another sovereign economic hub, very reminiscent of, guess what, post-emancipation, Reconstructive era power. Wilmington, we always hear about the massacre, but we never think about, well, why was there a massacre? It's because they were too powerful. We hear about the kingdom in the mountains, where our history comes. Why do we never hear about a U.S. kingdom being on U.S. soil with 2 kings and a queen? And some of those folks came to the east, was a part of the incubation of Soul City, but they were also attacked. And then here's Soul City continuing that legacy of power. In the 80s, we see 82, as you told us, that was in the beginning of the issue. That was when the issue came to the climatic head. But it is not coincidence to me, and I remember hearing this conversation with Dr. Chavis and Senator McKissick last year that just resonated, sat on my spirit. Okay, we keep being told in the media that we were solely dumped on because we're poor. We may be poor economically, but we're rich, whether it's supporting one another, educating our children, creating the power of activism, like everything with your husband being at school and teaching, but giving permission to his daughter to continue the legacy. And then there's Soul City that would have been a rich economic hub, and it was a chemical that in part was used to be a weapon of destruction to decimate an area. And
don't forget in those 4 years of fighting to try to figure out what to do and how to not bring this thing to this community, don't forget the judges who ruled against us. There were many lawsuits. NAACP, local citizens.
Wow.
They lost every lawsuit. So, again, it goes back to the ballot box. My husband tells me all the time, the time you wake up is decided by the people you put into office. You know, it's simple stuff, but voting, elections matter. Who sits on a bench when you go to court? And my God, I sat in a court, a friend of mine is a judge here, I just wanted to go see him conduct business. Mm-hmm. I don't have to tell you how many of us were in that courtroom. Mm. The place was packed. I mean, you think you've gone into like a movie theater because you can't find a seat. It's court. Because we've done something dumb we shouldn't have done. And we're in court. Mm. And then we're going before white judges. Mm. I mean, I'd love to hear Carolyn Thompson talk about what she's done as a black judge. And, you know, maybe prison isn't the answer, or maybe incarceration, maybe it's rehabilitation. Mm-hmm. The ballot matters. Us going to cast our vote matters. It's so important. And it's the whole ticket. It's not just the person you see at the top. You got to go from the top all the way down to the bottom.
In our conversation, and just want to make sure that folks, it really resonates and sits, that our judges are extremely important when we're talking about even a hyper-local level, and ensuring that not only do you cast your vote, you have to complete the entire ballot.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is, it doesn't make sense to vote if you're not going to vote for everybody. And we see it every year, and the numbers will, you know, every vote that is cast gets counted. Right. And now with computers, you know, within a matter of hours, really, we can see how many votes were cast from each person in each race. Mm. And it's mind-boggling that people will only vote for like the top few people and forget the rest of the people on the ballot. Wow. You can't do that. No. You can't do that. And even if somebody is running unopposed, you still need to go vote. Right. Voting is so, so, so important. It dictates everything. Now, I mean, I was just listening to something the other night. The fact that the United States Supreme Court, for the first time in history, took away a constitutional right in Roe v. Wade is unheard of. Right. It matters. Absolutely. It matters. The President of the United States is the one who gets to say, here, this is my nominee, and then they got to go through the Congress and the Senate. And of course, if your party is in the minority, then the people that you'd like to see on that Supreme Court bench are not going to get there.
That's right.
So you just can't stress it enough.
But I appreciate how you thread the historical needle. You know, as we're, you know, going kind of winding down our conversation today, I just really want to ground for folks that even as you're talking about the historical implications of the long legacy of local communities having judges that aren't representative of the people and justice, this is the long-term impact all the way up to the federal Supreme Court, that we even saw really the exact same legal tactic that was used. Roe v. Wade was used in before 2013, but it came to fruition in 2013 when the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act that was fought for and won by black community and allies in 1965 is when the VRA, Voting Rights Act, was actually passed. It was gutted in 2013 using the exact same legal rights, the terminology, standing, the process the Supreme Court gutted, but the nation didn't stand up for black and brown communities when we said we've been gerrymandered. Our districts have been drawn to predetermine our vote, and now we see power that is unchecked on a larger scale. We've been experiencing it locally for years.
I was going to say, gerrymandering is still very much a part of what's going on in this state too. My husband was a plaintiff in the last lawsuit.
Wow.
Because let's say it like it is, the Republicans in our state legislature decided that they wanted to redraw the district lines. Now, to me, what's criminal is we go through this gerrymandering stuff every other year. Okay, the lines are drawn. Why do you need to? Oh, because the Republicans want to have a majority of their people in this district so that they can get elected. Like, this is a democracy. How is that fair? Right. How is you stack the decks in your favor and we have hardly anybody over here? Right. That's not democracy.
It's not. And we see the exact same legal authority being wielded and misused again in the exact same way for Roe v. Wade. And unfortunately, we're going to continue to see it. And the history lies in if folks study and stand up with black community when we're saying, don't dump on us. look closely at what is impacting us is going to impact everyone.
That's right.
And I always use that with an environmental context as we go into our wind down, and I want to hear more about what the Warren County Community Center is about to go into as a celebration of the 40th year. Is I always say this: air doesn't stop flowing just because it reaches a white neighborhood. Water doesn't stop flowing just because it reaches a white neighborhood. It doesn't read the census. So if it's contaminated, it may start as it was dumped in black community, but that water will continue to flow to the next community and the next, by which our livestock is grazing and feeding. It's going to get in our land, and then now you see the perpetuation of toxic chemicals, harm, political ineffectiveness that is polluting and corroding the entire nation. It just starts in our community, doesn't stop in our community. So when we stand up and we speak out, we're not only protecting and standing up for our rights to have human life and dignity, we're also standing up for the entire nation to say, be careful, it's coming to your community next. And in our conversation today, President Williams, I just am just so encouraged and just wish we could talk and continue our conversation. Because today we've gone through just the interconnectivity. We talk about for this summit's environmental justice and healthcare, but it's all intertwined. If you have, again, we've talked about voting, just to kind of go from the bottom where we've ended back to where we were at the beginning of this conversation. We've spoken about voting and how the importance of turning up at the ballot box will determine your judges and local elected leaders who, from the sheriff who was voted in, all the way to how the sheriff chooses their deputies, which is who was enforcing, what you said, those war type material when they were meeting 4-year-olds and arresting them and picking up children. Okay, that's based on your elections. Then the judges that oversaw the cases and the lawsuits by which the people filed to protest again in another form in their legal constitutional right, those judges then stopped that process of justice because, again, they were voted in. And we talk about the ballot box and we lend itself to, well, then what was dumped in that community. And we talked about PCB, chemical contaminants. That is one example of what, according to your speech, we've seen it in New York. We're seeing that now with PFAS across the nation, and especially in North Carolina, the same chemical action of dumping these contaminants without any corporate responsibility and accountability, and no elected officials to hold them accountable. So we've talked about that PCB, environmental justice, what it is that it actually is about, the dumping on black community, over 56%, and these numbers may change depending on the population and corporation, but 56% of all people of color in this nation live only 2 miles away from a toxic waste site. Why is that? You've heard it in this conversation with President Williams, the why. The targeted communities, the misperception, the racism wielded by from historically Jesse Helms all the way to the same tactics being used by legislators and local elected leaders now. So we've talked about environmental justice, overlap with disenfranchisement, overlap with the healthcare impacts that we don't understand, the gravity of the death, the illnesses, and the diseases, because our state, our community still refuse, our local elected leaders still refuse to require corporations to study the effects of the chemicals that they were allowed to dump in our community, which is negligence, irresponsible. That environmental justice intersection to healthcare, we've talked about all of that in this conversation, but also the power that lives here. The power of We Keep Us Safe, the power of history that is still incubating the youth to continue the revolution and the protests, and the narrative that you as a legacy keeper has continued to do for our people. So I honor you, I thank you. I am very full, I'm just very humble, very much so, just would have never seen this in my journey. Just passion, pursuit, and purpose, and just understand that as long as you walk in your purpose for your people, you're going to be exactly where you need to meet with your people. And so I just appreciate you.
Thank
and
you.
Honored to consider
And I
you.
appreciate you as well.
Yeah.
And even focusing on these issues, which are so very, very, very important. And you know, I think another very important lesson that we learned out of 40 years ago is that when we as black and white people come together, we can accomplish a lot.
That's right.
This divisiveness, this racism, this hatred is and prejudice are taught.
That's right.
You don't come out of the womb as a prejudiced person.
That's right.
So we just need to walk side by side with people. We are really, truly not so different.
That's right.
The outside of us may be different, our hair may be different, but people are people. Right. And we need to walk together and talk together and join forces together. It's amazing, excuse me, it's amazing what we can accomplish together.
That's right.
We don't want to be separated. That's not a good thing.
That's right.
It's really not.
And speaking of community and how folks can continue in unification, please tell us more about the 40th. anniversary celebrations and the 40th anniversary overall, and what's coming up next for the community center.
Well, we're very excited about the 40th anniversary of the start of the environmental justice movement, and there'll be actually some has started already, which is UNC Wilson Library in Chapel Hill has started an exhibit of pictures and words from 40 years ago. And then in September, which was the start of the protest 40 years ago, I understand Dr. Chavis is coming back. He'll be at Duke University and I think a couple other places that middle week, like from the 15th on. Here in Warren County, we are going to have a big event at Coley Springs Missionary Baptist Church, which is where people gathered and met and plotted and sang songs and prayed before they went out. That's going to be on the 17th. We'll start in the morning. We're going to have a walk back out to the dump, which is what they would do. They would leave from, gather at the church, get ready, and then go out to the dump. We'll go out to the dump. We'll have, I believe, some kind of ceremony and talking, and then come back, and there'll be more of a service, and then there'll also be a meal served on Saturday. And we're expecting a lot of people to come to that. I understand a lot of college students from the area are planning to come. And a lot of the people, well, 40 years later, we're not really sure how many of the 500 and so people who got arrested are still alive even, but people who were part of it will still come back. And then on the Saturday, on Sunday the 18th, we'll have a church service at Coley Springs Missionary Baptist Church, which we did 10 years ago to recognize the 30th. So we'll have another service. I actually have not even heard who's going to be coming for that service, but there'll be a number of people coming for that. And then the following week, we've got a couple more activities, ending with on the Saturday, September 24th, our local Warren County branch of the NAACP always has a Freedom Fund dinner. And this year we've partnered with the Warren County Environmental Action Team, and we'll do it together here at the Armory in Warren County. So we'll have, we'll be talking all about the community, the environmental justice movement. We'll have a speaker from Duke University, and I believe we may have one or two participants who were actually part of the marches back then. So I got to shore up and get ready for September because it proves to be it's going to be a busy time.
Well, we look forward to being back here with you all, celebrating and unification and community for the 40th.
Please
so thank you for letting folks know. So we hope to see y'all there as well,
exactly.
Or at least sharing the news. And so again, thank you, President Shauna Williams, for being with us for this inaugural summit, for this discussion, just your opening remarks and encouragement, and just the pathway of liberation that I hope folks understand that you actually received a roadmap today. If you didn't know, okay. Hope you know now. And so with that, thank you.
Thank you.
And just deep appreciation.
You're welcome, and thank you.